Oh hey, it's Emily. So I have a bit of a background change. It's the first weekend in October. Work has been crazy for the past couple of months, and I finally had a chance to just get a bit of a change of scenery, kind of go to somewhere else just with some books and some rosé, and just have a nice weekend. Come in for your brand, Emma. So I'm in a different place, but I have a good chance to just sit down and finally film my August and September wrap-ups. As I said, it's just been busy, so it's been kind of as much as I could do to keep up with the weekly reading vlogs, and so I just haven't had a chance to film these yet, and so I'm just gonna do some filming, just hang out, drink some rosé, talk about some books. It's gonna be a good time. For my August wrap up, and looking back at this list of stuff that I read in August, I feel like I read it so long ago, but that's why I've been doing weekly reading vlogs, so that I could at least have some sort of documentation of what my thoughts were like before 2 months after reading these books, because some of them I read 2 months ago. So first thing I finished in August was Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakravorty. And this is the third book in the David Bad trilogy. I absolutely love this series. And this series follows Nari, who is a con woman in 1800s Cairo. And she does have some unique abilities. She has some abilities with language and with healing, and she will pretend to heal people, but she actually does have some sort of abilities to kind of sense kind of what is wrong with people health-wise and potentially be able to fix some things. But she will give some medical advice that involves going to an apothecary that's down the street so that she can give that apothecary business as well, as an arrangement with the apothecary owner. And she, at one point when she's doing a healing ritual, it actually accidentally summons a Jinn warrior, and kind of goes on this adventure, needs to go to the city of Brass, Daevabad, and kind of gets swept up in Jinn politics and the politics of the city. Kind of becomes very, very involved and kind of in the center of all of this politics, and finds out about her family history. She didn't really know much about where she came from, so she finds out more about where she came from. It's just a fascinating series. I didn't particularly love the romantic elements of the first book, but that got better for me over the course of the series, and was kind of less of a focus in the rest of the series. But I absolutely love the characters. The world is just super fascinating and incredibly well developed, and it's just rich and colorful and just such a fun and interesting world to be in. The politics is super interesting, just the creatures and just the stuff that she gets up to is just a lot of fun to follow. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought this was an excellent conclusion to the series. I think the ending just made sense for a lot of the characters. I think it kind of went in a direction that I personally liked. I thought it was a super interesting ending, tying together a bunch of stuff that have been kind of threaded throughout the series, and it was just a really satisfying ending for me. So I absolutely adore this series. It's probably going to be one of my favorite series of the year, so would recommend. So the next thing I read was White Rage by Carol Anderson. So this one really talks about just kind of the history of racism in the United States, and kind of more specifically focuses on the United States, and kind of looks at the narrative of Black rage and really turns it on its head, and goes through from Reconstruction to present day, many points throughout history where whites have really been the one exhibiting white rage and denial and delay for any other group, particularly blacks, to get any of the rights that whites take for granted. And it was just a really honest look at some of these points in history, and just really questions that narrative of what Black rage is, and why it's just not true when looking at many points throughout history, or the history of the United States. I thought this was a really interesting read. I definitely learned a lot, and would highly recommend just for anyone to read, just to get more context. I next listened to Votes for Women by Winifred Conklin. This one specifically follows the suffrage movement in the United States, specifically from Seneca Falls to 1920, through the lens of 3 white women. So she talks about Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Alice Paul. So it's specifically those three women are kind of the lens of the story from Seneca Falls to 1920, which is a very narrow time frame and position to look at the women's suffrage movement. So it's definitely interesting. I definitely found out a lot of interesting things about that time period, about these women. So it definitely did provide new and interesting information, but it is definitely not the whole story. And I'll talk more about this a little bit later when I talk about another book I read to kind of fill in the gap that I knew was missing of like the many other women, particularly Black women, who were instrumental in the suffrage movement before that, after that period. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it was interesting for what it was, and I would recommend it just as context for those, that very specific kind of set of time and group of people. But don't make this the only thing you read about the suffrage movement, because you're going to be missing a lot, frankly. I next finished The Burning Page by Genevieve Cogman. Rosé break. And this is the third book in the Invisible Library series. And this one, it wasn't my favorite. It's a kind of a transition book, I think. So it picks up on a particular thread that had kind of been throughout the first couple of books and really follows that thread. And it was definitely interesting and fun to follow, but you're not really following a particular world. And kind of what I've liked about, you know, the other books is they're kind of set in a particular world or alternate, and you know, you kind of get to know that world and kind of go through an adventure in that world. And this one kind of was an in-between book, I guess is kind of a way to put this. I can't talk about it too much because it's the third book in this series, but this one follows Irene, who works for a library that is outside of space and time. And what she does for this library essentially is take texts from different worlds, and that kind of increases the library's connection with those worlds. But they basically collect texts, and if there is a particular version of a text that is very unique to a world, then, you know, sometimes they'll be sent to collect that and add that to the library. And, you know, of course, sometimes getting these books is easier than other times, and you follow Irene's adventures. And it's just a fun series. It's, you know, it's a pretty lighthearted, fun, just adventure series that I've overall really enjoyed. So yeah, I would recommend this series overall. This one in particular wasn't my favorite, but it definitely was still a fun ride for sure. I next listened to The Boundless by Anna Bright on Scribd. I listened to the audiobook. And this one is the book after The Beholder. And so it's the second in a series, so I'm not going to talk more specifically about the plot of that one, but this one follows a young girl who's eventually going to lead her people, and her stepmother, her marriage prospects kind of fall apart at home. She needs to marry for political reasons, and her stepmom kind of sends her on an adventure to go find someone suitable to marry. But she really finds out that she's sent away because there's a lot more going on than meets the eye politically, so she kind of needs to figure out the politics of what's happening between her people and, you know, just different groups kind of around the world as she's going to different places to meet these suitors. It's a fine series. There's nothing particularly special about it for me. It's a pretty slow series, and I feel like there was definitely some stuff that could have been either cut out, or we could have, I think, gained a lot by adding some additional perspectives to get to see some other things that were happening that our main character wasn't, you know, a part of or like directly involved in, and so we couldn't get it if we were following her perspective. So I feel like it could have benefited from adding different perspectives and kind of following some of the faster moving stuff that was happening in other parts of the world. I don't know. I think it was fine. It was okay. It was, you know, I'm not really going to feel a need to reread this series, but it was fun to finish the story and kind of see what happened to this group of people. So I definitely don't regret reading it by any means. Like, it was still a fun time. So I next read Girl Serpentthorne by Melissa Bastardoust, and this one follows it's a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, follows a princess named Soraya who, her twin brother is actually going to be the one that will lead her people soon. And she can't be a part of that because she's actually been cursed to be poisonous to the touch. And so she is trying to find a way to lift this curse. in the process of trying to find a way and get information and try to be able to lift this car, she, you know, there's a whole adventure that she goes on. And I honestly had a lot of fun reading this book. I think the world was super interesting, and the politics and the different groups that she meets and kind of their interaction with her people and amongst themselves was really interesting. So like the world building, the politics, kind of some of the adventure aspects I thought were really, really fun. I think this book lacked in the character development department. So the characters, like, to some degree, some of the characters just kind of felt generic a bit. I think the romance was definitely not there for me. It's like pretty hard to sell me on romances in general anyway. But this one was super fast to develop after like a couple of conversations. I'm like, that's okay. So that just really, that development wasn't there for me, and that romance wasn't believable for me throughout the story. Just like some of the characters in general, their dynamics just weren't developed. Well, it's a pretty short book, so, you know, maybe just some more time there for character development and more space in the book would have been maybe, I think, good, but, you know, overall super fun. I could definitely see myself being in the mood to read this again because I just had a good time reading it. So the next book I listened to was This Alien Shore by C.S. Friedman. And this one follows Jamesia. Well, it follows a couple of different threads. So you follow Jamesia, and there's an explosion where she is. She's kind of very quickly kind of sent away by her mentor. And he basically sends her away and says, like, I'm sorry, I couldn't protect you any longer. Like, here's some information if you really, really need it, but just, you know, get away. And he's clearly trying to hide something that he knows she'll need to know eventually, but doesn't really want her to find out. So there's something going on there. You don't really know what it is, and she doesn't really know what it is and is trying to figure out what's going on. There's also kind of a separate thread that you follow. There's a virus killing some pilots. So in this world, humans have tried to colonize other places before. There was some genetic mutations and repercussions from their attempts to go out into the stars. And so they very quickly went back to Earth and kind of abandoned the places that they had kind of colonized or started, because they just couldn't maintain their ability to actually send people there at the risk of them getting these genetic mutations. And there's one corporation that has found a way to actually safely get people to actually be able to travel amongst the stars. So they basically have a monopoly on space travel, like successful space travel through certain areas of space. And so there are a bunch of pilots that work for this company to kind of safely navigate through some of these areas of space. And some of these pilots are dying by a virus. And so people, you know, this company's trying to figure out what's going on. That kind of intersects with Jamesia's storyline, kind of the information Jamesia finds out about herself. And, you know, it's just kind of a fun space mystery, you know, with some adventure elements in there too. I thought it was super interesting. I had a really fun time listening to this one. I'm very excited that there's actually, I think there's going to be another book in this world. So it is a self-contained story. It was actually published, I think, back in the 90s, and it's a self-contained story. But she's actually either just recently or is about to actually publish another book in this world that I'm guessing is maybe a companion novel or something. So I'll be interested to check that out. This was a super fun world and a super fun story to follow. So I next tried to read The Damned by Renee Audier, the second book after The Beautiful. The audiobook wasn't quite working for me, so I'm just going to come back to this later physically. So not a permanent DNF. I'm definitely interested in continuing on with that story. Just, you know, at that moment, for some reason, the audiobook wasn't quite clicking with me, so I'm just going to come back to it. And the next book that I read was Lifting as We Climb by Yvette Dion. I listened to this on Scribd, and this kind of ties back to Votes for Women and what I was referring to there. So this book, I wanted to kind of get the story of Black women who were critical to the suffrage movement, and so this book was exactly that. So would highly recommend. I thought it was fascinating, and it follows, you know, before Seneca Falls, kind of the women who were very involved, and you know, the interactions between the abolition movement and the suffrage movement. And you know, Votes for Women didn't kind of shy away from talking about the complexities of that interaction and kind of the racist ways that some of the suffrage leaders acted, and some of the racists that they aligned themselves with as well in order to accomplish their goals. And but you know, Lifting as We Climb really went more into detail about the, you know, back and forth fraught relationship that the abolition movement and suffrage movement had at times, and you know, talked about some of the key women that aren't really talked about as much in history who were very critical along the way. And she also continues after 1920. So 1920 is not like the end of the story. It wasn't like 19th Amendment passed and then all of a sudden all women could vote. Like, that's not how that worked. And so she continues the story after 1920 and says that Black women in particular are still fighting to vote. She points to what happened in, you know, recent elections with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, and you know, we can see some of the signs of that going on right now too in this current election. And you know, so she points to that and says, like, this is still a struggle, this is not over, and there are new barriers that are being lifted to people being able to vote. And so, you know, it's just a very interesting book, and I think a very important one. So I would recommend this one to kind of fill in a lot of that history that is less frequently talked about. So the next book I read was Born Both by Hida Valoria. Look to my vlog, so I'll be sure to link all my vlogs below. I talk in my vlog about why I'm going to use the gender pronoun Z instead of he, him, she, her, they, them. So just FYI. So Hida is an intersex advocate. I also talk more in that vlog about what intersex is, but essentially it's either your sex chromosomes or like genetic characteristics or physical sex characteristics that don't clearly kind of demark someone as male or female. And so he is intersex, and Z was born in Queens, and so this memoir just talks about growing up, kind of struggles with growing up, figuring out Z's body, figuring out relationships with family and friends, and kind of just everyday struggles like that. And you know, kind of finds out more about Z's body differences, and finds out more about Z's body differences, kind of finds the word intersex, and meets intersex individuals, kind of interacts with intersex organizations, and becomes, you know, over time kind of becomes an activist that really talks about intersex issues. So many intersex babies are forced to undergo different surgeries to correct their bodies, and that can be pretty devastating, have a lot of really negative consequences. And so Hida, you know, although Hida did not fortunately have to undergo surgery like that, you know, talks a lot about, you know, the struggles that other intersex individuals face, and kind of Z's history with just activism and just stories about activism and, you know, trying to connect to that community and speak for that community or help highlight the struggles that that community faces. I thought it was a really interesting memoir. I would highly recommend, because there is just a lot there that, you know, just really isn't talked about a lot. I next read How to Defeat the Demon King in 10 Easy Steps by Andrew Rowe. This was precious. I really freaking loved this story. It's a pretty short Audible original, and this follows a world where there is a cycle, and a hero will come to defeat the Demon King, and then, you know, a cycle, the Demon King will rise again, a hero will come again. It's just like a cycle that constantly repeats itself. And, you know, in this particular cycle, the Demon King is kind of coming to power much faster than in other cycles. And, you know, there's still a while to wait before a hero rises, but our main character says, well, we can't wait. There's not going to be a world for the hero to save if we let the Demon King keep going at this rate. And so our main character decides to fake it and become the hero and defeat the Demon King. And so it's also really cool because in this world, it's kind of a video game-esque element too, where you gain different skills and you can kind of level up. It was just a super entertaining, fun story that was just about not waiting around for some hero to come solve problems, but just taking things into your own hands and doing what you can with what you have. It was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And the last thing I read in the month of August was Domenicana by Angie Cruz, and this one follows Anna, who is a young girl in the Dominican Republic, and for family reasons, essentially she agrees to marry a much older man who, you know, takes her to New York City where some of his brothers are, and you know, there are business opportunities in New York City, and so he kind of takes her to New York City, and she is struggling, so it's not a happy relationship. She is abused, and so, you know, there's quite a few trigger warnings throughout this book too, so please look those up as well. And she, you know, it's about her coming to a new place where she doesn't know anyone, she doesn't speak the language, she's, you know, in an abusive relationship and trying to just figure out which way is up and just try to protect herself and just try to do the best that she can, but also do the best that she can for her family and try to earn some money for herself so that she can send it back to her family. And it is just it's beautifully written. I also love the narrator as well. I listened to this one on audio, and it's just a beautifully written, beautifully told story of immigration and just how hard it can be. And this is set in, I believe, the 60s. And so there's also, so it's a historical fiction, but it was a gorgeous, gorgeous story that I would highly recommend. At one point in her story, her husband has to go back to the Dominican Republic because there's some political unrest, and one of his brothers, so one of her brother-in-laws, is kind of staying with her, and you know, they kind of start to get feelings for each other, and so there's that she's also struggling with. Anyway, it's just, there's a lot going on, but it is such a beautifully written and told story, and I think everyone should read it. So that's it. That's everything I read in the month of August. Please let me know if you've read any of these, or if any of these sound interesting. Let me know how your reading month in August went. I know it probably feels like forever ago. But thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more bookish content. I'll be sure to leave my Instagram and Twitter linked down below. That's where I like to hang out. And I'll also, of course, leave more resources for how you can help support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.